Let's get started with our next topic. I'm really delighted to introduce, the next topic, which is enabling the next generation technologies. It's a super, interesting topic. It's about brain computing. We'll hear more from our two excellent speakers. First is, let me introduce you to Rafic Makki, Dr. Rafic Makki. Some of us close, we allow to call him Doc. Rafic is the CTO and the Chief Strategy Officer at Mubadala Ventures. Probably all of us have heard about Mubadala Capital. Mubadala Ventures is part of Mubadala Capital. Mubadala Capital, I think it is close to $300 billion fund. So at Rafic, Rafic oversees, he's the technology brains behind all of their investments and portfolios. Previously, Rafic was an executive fellow and heading the strategy office at GlobalFoundries. Now semiconductors has become so important. We'll also probably, hopefully, we can, Rafic can also share some of his insights on how he moved from Semi to whatever he's doing at Mubadala. So with that, right, so Rafic is going to have a chat with Michael Major. He's the CEO of Precision Neuroscience, the amazing startup, which the portfolio of Mubadala, where Michael and his team, they're working on the next generation technology. We will have the two speakers discuss about what's happening with the brain computing. With that, let me welcome Rafic and Michael.
Thank you very much, Anil. Good morning, everyone. It's great to be with you today. Our session is more on the application side of manufacturing. It's about an emerging field of science and technology. It brings together a number of disciplines, including semiconductor technology and MEMS, healthcare and medicine, neuroscience and cognitive science. Oh, and I have to mention AI as well. And it's a very exciting, growing field, and one that will one day make a very significant difference in our lives. And I am thrilled to be with Michael today. I can't think of anybody better to speak to the topic of brain-computer interfaces than Michael. Michael, good morning. Good to be with you.
Pleasure to be here.
So I thought maybe we start, if you would give us an overview of what BCI is. There's a lot of confusion about this field and where we are today.
Absolutely. Thanks to TiEcon for inviting us, and Rafic, it's great to be here. So brain-computer interfaces, BCI, as they're commonly known, create a direct digital pathway between the electrical signals of the brain and computers. This sounds like science fiction, but in fact, this is something that works. We know it works because the first example of a successful BCI was nearly 20 years ago. And in the intervening years, we have had a number of people implanted with BCI systems who are generally quadriplegic, so paralyzed from the neck down, who have been able to play video games, communicate through messages, operate computers, and operate prosthetic limbs through thought alone. Unfortunately, this is technology that up until now has had relatively narrow impact. Fewer than 40 people over the course of the last 19 years have successfully been implanted with BCI technology. And when they have, it's generally been in an academic setting. So, as with many important new technologies, I think timing is everything. And I'm excited to say that over the course of the next 2, 3, 4 years, I think we're going to see a much, much broader impact to BCI technology, taking this core platform that we know works, but up until now has really been in sort of a prototype type phase in academic settings with technicians, and productizing it. And that's really a function of several enabling technologies, which in 2004, 2005, 2006 were not available but are today. A few, just to give you a sense, minimally invasive surgical approaches in order to get systems into people in much less invasive manners. A lot of this technology has been pioneered in cardiac medicine, is now available in neurosurgery. Of course, AI-based software is going to be core to the functionality of these systems and has made tremendous progress. And also miniaturization of electronics for much more efficient and successful processing of information and power usage, to name a few. But I think we're on the cusp now of seeing technology really productized that's been proven in the academy and moved to make a meaningful clinical difference.
So there are a variety of vehicles for this. Ones that require surgical operation and ones that you just wear. Could you speak about the difference between having an implant, an actual implant in the brain versus wearing something that reads the electrical signals coming from the brain in the aggregate?
Yeah, I mean, so when we talk about BCI, we talk about implantable systems. Systems that are wearable, it would be ideal if you could create a high bandwidth link between brains and computers through a wearable device and obviate the need for a surgery. That would clearly be optimal. However, the skull creates a significant physical barrier, and in order to drive BCI functionality that is going to make a difference in people's lives, you need both spatial resolution and temporal resolution that is simply physically impossible through a wearable system. So what we're left with is implantable systems. In terms of implantable systems, there are a number of different approaches that are being pursued by companies. There are really sort of 5 companies in the space, including Precision Neuroscience, the company that I'm the CEO of, which are pursuing implantable BCI systems. The technology that underpins most of the implants to date is really based on penetrating electrodes. So electrodes that, in order to interface with neurons, actually penetrate into brain tissue. This has the advantage of giving you, really close proximity to the neurons that you're hoping to listen to and stimulate. But it has some pretty obvious drawbacks as well. Pretty intuitively, if you have a system that, in order to create higher bandwidth interfaces with the brain, you need to do more and more damage to underlying brain tissue because each electrode requires penetrating into brain tissue. There's a limit to how scalable that can ever be. And the systems that historically have been implanted have 100 electrodes. We're now moving into the several hundred. Our system has 1,000 electrodes. But what we believe over time is that these will be hundreds of thousands of electrodes, eventually millions. It's hard to imagine hundreds of thousands or millions of little needles penetrating into brain tissue. And this is the approach, I think that's being pursued by still most of the BCI community. A little bit less intuitively, but also quite important. Invasive approaches also still require a craniotomy, i.e. removing part of the skull to access the brain tissue in which the penetrating electrodes are placed. And you can't remove lots of different areas of the skull without doing sort of unacceptable damage to the structure of the skull itself. And so these systems will, I think, struggle not just to implant hundreds of thousands and millions of electrodes, but also to interface with multiple areas of the brain at once. Another approach that's being pursued, which I think has a great deal of elegance to it, is an endovascular approach, i.e. going through the veins. Synchron is the most prominent company that's doing it in this way. And while I think that has a clear benefit of again, sort of obviating the need for an invasive craniotomy, the drawback with an endovascular approach is that you're pretty far from the neurons that you're trying to record and stimulate. So our approach at Precision Neuroscience, we think, is the optimal balance of resolution and safety. Our system is based on a very thin cortical surface array. So this is basically a 20 microns thick, so a fifth of the width of a human hair, array that sits on top of the brain. very conformally without doing any damage to the brain. And so I think what this enables is a system that is minimally invasive, reversible, and super high bandwidth, where there's no relationship between the number of electrodes that you implant in the brain and damage to the underlying brain tissue.
And that's fantastic, Michael. But what are some of the manufacturing challenges that you have faced as you develop your platform?
So what we're doing is hard. There are challenges all over the place. I'll name a few challenges which I think encompass some of the manufacturing questions that you just asked. I'd say there are sort of three broad challenges that we face. The first, what we're doing, I think, is deeply interdisciplinary. We're bringing together, as you mentioned in your introduction, microfabrication expertise, electronics expertise, hardware engineering, software engineering, firmware. It's a very interdisciplinary project, and we need to bring all that together through a system that is, works with an extremely high rate of success. Safety, I think, is really you can't compromise when you're talking about an implantable system. And so you really need to take sort of a systems engineering approach to this problem. Two, we're in a regulated environment, and I think that just means in terms of sort of speed and in terms of our focus on safety, it's a longer and more capital-intensive road than industries that have a much lighter regulatory burden. There's a regulatory burden for very good reason. Obviously, this is, these are systems that you want to have a high degree of oversight for to ensure safety and efficacy. But it does have knock-on effects on timelines and budgets for companies in our field. And I think, third is access. These are systems that we want to make sure are not only available to certain groups, certain demographics, and certain socioeconomic groups. And for that to happen, we really, insurance reimbursement is really key. So this is about, this is a long-term game of, ensuring that both public insurance like Medicare and Medicaid, as well as private insurance, reimburse practitioners and companies for the costs of these systems. I think there's a lot of precedent for doing this, and I think what we have the benefit of is, pretty profound improvement in life among patient populations that right now really have no or very little therapies available to them. But, I think it is beyond the regulatory challenge. Reimbursement is another key challenge.
So speaking of the regulatory challenge, where are we with regulation for brain-computer interfaces and standards at the hardware level, standards at the data level?
We're early. And, the FDA, I think, to their credit, is really constructively working with industry. A lot of the people in the FDA who are in charge of overseeing the brain-computer interface industry actually come from the BCI industry from an academic standpoint in one way or another. They know that this technology, who are we addressing? We are introducing this technology, all the BCI companies that are implantable. The first use case is for people who are paralyzed, either as a result of spinal cord injury, of certain kinds of stroke, neurodegenerative diseases, traumatic brain injury. These are people for whom there's really no therapy beyond physical rehab, which, everyone plateaus at a certain point. There's really nothing available to. And so it's a patient population that's really hungry for assistive technology to make their lives better. And I think the FDA really recognizes that. That said, there are, as I mentioned earlier, several different approaches to BCI which have different fundamental safety profiles and efficacy profiles. And so, trying to determine a standard protocol for how to judge BCI technology, I think is something that the FDA, frankly, is working through themselves and are looking to industry and other stakeholders like patient advocates to help them think through. So we're in the early stages of it, but we are actively engaged with FDA, and so far we see a very constructive approach.
Are we moving too slowly, you think, because the regulatory environment is not there yet? I mean, The first brain-computer interface was developed, I believe, at Georgia Tech in 1998. Deep brain stimulation has been around for a long time. Are we moving too slowly?
So I think there was a long period, I think there's a pendulum that swings back and forward. I think there was a long period at FDA where there was an incredibly conservative stance taken to their core mission of safety and efficacy. And that had a real chilling effect on the number of medical devices that were approved, and as a result of that, the amount of funding available to early stage companies developing med tech. I believe we're coming out of that, and I see a much more constructive FDA now that recognizes that this is not a question of eliminating risk, because no procedure has a 0% risk. It's about weighing the risk and the benefit. And I think what we're dealing with in BCI and in other medical technologies is really profound patient benefit. And so I think the FDA recognizes that and wants to see more technology out in the wild than has been the case for the past 10 years.
So what can we really do today with brain-computer interfaces? What are we allowed to do? I mean, we've all read the stories about Synchron. They use a stent that goes through the jugular, and we've seen the videos of an ALS patient actually tweet by just thinking about it. Where are we today?
So, I mean, I think if you look at the history of BCI, what these systems have largely focused on is control of a computer. And, that has been, as you said, this has been sort of 20 years plus in the making. What I'm incredibly excited about, and I think we're only scratching the surface of now, is how new approaches to AI-based software are going to enable functionality that we could only sort of dream of just even a few years ago. When you're talking about the brain, you're talking about 100 billion neurons, and the firing patterns happen in the thousandths of a second. So our system is 1,000 electrodes, each of which samples at many thousand times a second. The amount of data that we are collecting from our array is extraordinary, every minute, every hour, every day. The ability for new AI-based systems to make sense of that data, to discern patterns in that data, and as a result, effectively to decode the neural patterns in order to drive function, I think we're at the beginning of a very extraordinary time. But you've been asking me a lot of questions, Rafic. I want to ask...
It's my job. Doing my job.
I want to turn the tables a little bit. You've watched this industry develop for a very long time from the sidelines. You made an investment recently in precision neuroscience. Why did you see an opportunity today?
Yeah, I tell you, apart from the benefits that brain-computer interfaces will give us on the medical front and the healthcare front, I believe that one day brain-computer interfaces will help us unravel, unlock one of the greatest mysteries in the history of humankind, and that's the mystery of the human brain. The human brain is a marvel compute engine. It is the most efficient, energy-wise compute engine known. The human brain processes information at 100 bits per second, roughly. It receives information through our sensory networks at almost 4 megabits per second. So in that sense, it is a marvel of data compression. It does data compression at a rate of 100,000 to 1. We can certainly learn how it does that. And on the energy front, it uses a mere quarter of a femtojoule per flop. And amazing. The human brain imagines, the human brain dreams, it has an ego, it is conscious. And what bigger challenge does humankind have than unlocking the mystery of the human brain and how it works? Now, we've learned a lot over the past few decades. You're well aware of the BRAIN initiative that started in 2013. funded through NIH, but many government agencies are involved in it. And since 2013, they've spent about $2 billion worth of funding, of R&D funding. So when I say $2 billion, you say, oh wow, that's a lot. But I think it's just a drop in the bucket. Actually, it's a drop in the ocean. And I say that because everything in life is relative. If you think about what it would mean to decipher the human brain, the enormity of that, the scale of the solutions that it might open up for humankind, right? I wonder why, Michael, and for the life of me, I wonder why we don't spend $100 billion a year, every year, on brain research. Imagine how that will galvanize universities. Imagine the thousands of students that will go into that field, the thousands of faculty that will be doing research in that field. Why don't we have a national lab that's larger than all the other labs, Sandia, NRL, put together, just focusing on brain research? And so when we invested in Precision Neuro, it is with this background that we were thinking. And I believe that one day, BCI will be part of the answer. It will help us achieve part of the answer. And I know we're running out of time, and I want to be sure to leave some questions for the audience.
Maybe I'll ask one. Mubadala Ventures to get along. Please learn to get along. If you would like to share what Mubadala Ventures is about.
Certainly. Well, we invested in a number of areas, and obviously an investment in brain-computer interfaces is part of our deep tech focus area, and we kind of look at the world through the lens of these grand challenges that humanity is facing. So within deep tech, we focus on things like climate change, climate tech. We focus on digital biology, which is the marriage between technology and biology, and certainly BCI is part of that. We focus on next generation compute, what happens after Moore's Law. We sort of killed, you and I at GlobalFoundries, we killed Moore's Law back in 2012. But it's still alive somehow, and because of all the innovation that is happening in the semiconductor world. So next generation compute, and certainly quantum computing is an area we have invested in. And finally, intelligent edge. And the way we look at our investments, we start with the grand challenge, as I said, and then we look at moonshot type of projects. So for example, what has to happen for us to have real-time machine learning at the edge? So then we look at all the things that have to come together to make that happen, and we make our investments that way. Right? In digital biology, one area that we're very interested in is using DNA for storage. Right? So DNA for digital storage. And again, we ask ourselves, what does the moonshot project look like? What are all the technologies that have to happen to make digital storage using DNA a reality? And practical. So that's the lens that we view the world.
Thank you, Rafic. Well, can I have a question?
This question is for Michael. The role of brain years ago, decipher the potential of the brain, which is massive as well. What about genomics? Genomics doesn't seem that invasive, and what kind of role genomics can play in achieving precision neuroscience?
I think the way that the interface is created will absolutely change over time. From our perspective, there are over 1 million people in the United States alone, and many multiples of that globally, who right now are paralyzed, who have trouble communicating, who have trouble interacting with the digital world, and as a result, really struggle to have jobs. And there is technology that is extremely well validated. We know it works, and we know it will make a meaningful difference in those people's lives. I think from a moral perspective, as well as from a commercial perspective, focusing on getting that technology in a safe and scalable way out to the patients that we know will benefit from it is priority 1, 2, and 3. Where we go from there, I think, has a lot of very exciting potentials in a number of directions. But we want to first focus on accomplishing something that is very achievable in the sort of short to medium term.